following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back talking vintage sports from the old garden on 49th Street in New York City. Nedick at that. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We have a partially full house. Hal Bach is here from the Associated Press. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you. David Hubler returns after a week hiatus. How are you, David?
I'm fine, well rested and ready to go.
Good. We have a great topic. We may be joined by George Case. We may be joined by Al Blumkin. If not, we can handle it because this is, as Hal says, his favorite topic. The Hall of Fame ballots have just been released, and of course it brings to mind not only who's eligible now and what their chances are, but a letter that came down the pike today really interested me. It's from Joe Morgan, and Joe Morgan has been on the board of directors of the Hall of Fame voting for a long time. And just to give you some idea, he advises the Baseball Writers Association of America, the voters, not to elect steroid users into the Hall of Fame. But he admits it's quite tricky because there are a number of steroid users, in quote, that were identified by the Mitchell Committee but never admitted to use of steroids. And so his words, it's a tricky situation. That's Joe Morgan. Oh, he understates it, how tricky it is. Let me start with Hal Bach and have you tell us just how tricky it is.
Oh, it's very tricky. There are people who will tell you that there are players in the Hall of Fame who used steroids and PEDs and have been elected to the Hall of Fame. There were a lot of rumors. There were a lot of rumors about Jeff Bagwell. There were a lot of rumors about Mike Piazza. There were a lot of rumors about Pudge Rodriguez. But my favorite is Bud Selig. Bud Selig was the commissioner in the middle of the steroid crisis in baseball, and he stuck his head in the sand pretty good. So, I mean, you know, as Joe Morgan said, it's a tricky situation. But there are some players on this ballot who, there's no question in my mind that they abuse steroids and PEDs, and I would never have voted for them if I still had a ballot, but I don't anymore. They took that away. But Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds are, as far as I'm concerned, they were outlaws in Major League Baseball. So they don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But because of the rules being changed in the last few years, they're getting closer. And maybe that's why Joe Morgan sent the letter that he did.
Okay. Do you think that the players that played against Bonds and Clemens were predominantly on steroids? 50% of the players, 20, 80? What's your estimate?
At the height of the crisis, I would say there were probably 60 to 70% of the players who were using drugs. That ended many years ago, maybe 15 years ago. But I think there are still players who abuse the substances, and I think the best example, and lie about it, the best example of that is Alex Rodriguez, who flat out lied on national television. He lied in a press conference saying he never used, and then he decided to come clean and sat out a whole season at the end of his career as a penalty for using drugs. And nobody has, or very few players have numbers that are better than Rodriguez, and it's going to be very interesting when he becomes eligible what kind of support he will get from the voters.
Yeah, put that into context with the fact that he did sit out a year, that he finally admitted to it, and place it in the context of all of these people now, men coming and admitting to their wrongdoings in terms of sexual abuse and all that stuff. But the point is that I'm just curious about is where does, as you say, his numbers certainly qualify for the Hall of Fame. Does he get a pass for having sat out the year as an atonement, or does he?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay, I'm asking. I'm
How many of those? He hit, 615 or 20 home runs?
Right.
Maybe even more than that. I'm not even sure. But how many of those home runs came while he was on PEDs?
Yeah, I know.
Virtually all of those, I would guess, because
a lot of them, an awful lot of them. And no, absolutely. Well, again, that's my stance. I am a hardliner about this. I no longer vote, probably because I'm a hardliner. A couple of years ago, the board of directors of the Hall of Fame decided that veteran writers who were no longer active covering the game were no longer qualified to vote. Well, let me tell you this. I watch more baseball than most of the members of the board of directors. I watch games every night. So I know the game, and I know the players, and I have a pretty good idea who played clean and who didn't play clean. The Hall of Fame wanted better support for the steroid population. And so what they did was knock off about 100 writers. The most experienced, the most knowledgeable, were just eliminated. They took our ballots away. It infuriated many of us, but there's nothing we can do about it. So now the voting population is a much younger one. And the younger writers will say, well, you forgive and you forget. I don't forgive and forget. So as a result, I don't have a ballot. But the younger guys who do probably will support these players more generously than the older fellows who would not. So as a result, they took away our ballots. And as far as I'm concerned, the voting process is now rigged in the favor of steroid abusers. And that is probably why Joe Morgan felt obliged to write that letter. Do I get a little
incidentally agrees.
Do I get a little hot under the collar when I discuss this? I guess I do.
But that's fine. I mean, I think you're right. I was just throwing that out as sort of a hypothetical. The other thing I think where you're right is I was very upset when I heard about. Well, I didn't realize at the time that you were one of them, but that all of these writers were losing their ballot, because there goes the historical memory going back maybe certainly into the 60s, if not into the 50s in many cases, and even earlier than that among some of the older sports writers. And now you are left with a bunch of younger writers, many of them who came up after Mickey Mantle died. So, it's hard to understand how they could have the ballot alone. I don't say they shouldn't have ballots, because I know there's a certain amount of years that you have to be writing on the sport before they give you a ballot. 10 years.
10 years.
That's a good amount of time. But it doesn't.
I'll tell you how I know exactly what infuriates you about this the most is that fans and writers are no longer able to objectively compare generation to generation.
Well, they never could. They never could. I mean, the dead ball era was one kind of baseball, and the era when they had no minorities, no black players. How good would Mickey Mantle have been if he had to face Satchel Paige? I don't know. I have no way of telling. How many home runs would Josh Gibson have hit? I don't know. I have no way of telling.
And all the other unnamed players, not just Page, but pitchers and players from the Negro Leagues that a lot of us never heard of would have been
absolutely
candidates for the big leagues. If you put it that way, where every era is an entity to itself,
Absolutely.
And could you ever see yourself
differs from 10 or 15 years?
Put in the deserving players, stat-wise or whatever, from this era, figuring that it was a steroid era, and just identify it on the plaque that the statistics have been messed with. But these are the best players of the era, the Bonds, the Clemens, and a case could be made that they should go in because without steroids, they had Hall of Fame careers.
That's the irony of it. Both of them would have gone in without question if they had just gone about their business. But by apparently, and we don't have proof, we don't have tests that they failed, but we all believe that they violated the rules, and as a result, they have not been able to get in. Now, if they had played the game the way they had the first maybe 10 years of their careers, I don't think there's any question that both of them would have been in. They might not have had the kind of statistics that they finished their careers with. Bonds finished with, 678 home runs or 77, something like that.
I think
Clemens
before
won
he
350 games.
started using, he had 400 some odd home runs.
I know.
And 400 stolen bases.
I know. He was a tremendous player.
Yeah.
But he felt obliged. The story goes that he was angry at the attention that was showered on Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire in 1998 when they staged this great race to break Babe Ruth's record of Roger Maris's record of 61 home runs.
Right, yeah.
And Bonds got very jealous because he knew he was every bit the player of those two guys were. And so he started to use started to use steroids to improve his numbers. And his numbers went through the roof. Well, that's fine, but how many of those home runs were legitimate? I don't know. Probably maybe 100 or so, or maybe 200 that were not. Well, for me, you broke the rules. There's a rule. There's Rule 5 on the instructions to writers, and it designates certain things: sportsmanship, integrity, as qualifications for the Hall of Fame. Well, to me, that's not sportsmanship and that's not integrity if you're going to use drugs to improve your numbers. So that's my stance. It doesn't matter because I don't have a voice anymore. I can say it here on
I want your opinion about
radio.
Steroid users use today. Do the masks, the chemists that come up with these cover-up agents that block the testing, have they gotten ahead of the testing system? And are
highly
there
possible?
Yeah, are there
highly possible? I don't know.
More guys that are still on it than were.
But we are getting very inflated numbers again. I mean, we had a kid here in New York, Aaron Judge, who he couldn't hit the side of a barn last year. He struck out every time he was up. It was amazing. And he batted about 150 in his first 25, 30 games with the Yankees. Now he comes up this year and hits 52 home runs. Well, I don't think
steroid use lets you helps you lay off the bad pitch that he became.
That's true.
That's true. Off.
But he struck out. He also struck out a heck of a lot of times this year.
Yeah, and he almost didn't make the roster right at the end of spring training.
That's right. So. That's right. And then we have Giancarlo Stanton hit 59 home runs. Well, I have no reason to doubt his abilities, and I have no reason to believe that he was on drugs. But 59 home runs is amazing. I mean, it's a lot of home runs,
That's a lot of home runs. But you know what gets me? How little publicity that got along the way. He hits 59, could have hit 60, was up for hitting 60. They didn't have a moment-to-moment watch for the guy hitting 60 home runs. It's become commonplace.
Well, part of the difference was, of course, one was the New York media and one was the Miami media. So
you mentioned before, the game has changed. The eras change, and the game has changed. And the game today strikeout, home run. Either I'm going to hit it out of the ballpark or it's going to be strike three and I go sit down on the bench.
And they don't care. They don't care.
They don't care. They love it. Are you kidding? The home run is the glamour moment of the game.
That's right. That's right.
And so that's what we have. Now,
Al, I have a question for you. How do you react when somebody says there are a number of Hall of Fame players in there because of the power of the New York media?
Well, I disagree, and that's probably predictable since I'm part of the New York media.
You were the dean of it, actually.
Hardly.
Head baseball writer for the Associated Press for 43 years. You're right there, baby.
Well, thank you.
Right.
I would say this. I think that the New York writers are knowledgeable, and I don't think they're swayed by anything other than pure ability and demonstrated ability of the players that they have to vote on. And, I think that we as a group, and again, I don't include myself anymore, but when I was voting, I think as a group, we were a demanding group. We wanted excellence. This is not the Hall of very good. This is the Hall of great. You have to be great to be, in my opinion, you have to be great to be admitted to the Hall of Fame. Now, there are players in the Hall of Fame who were not great, and I can cite a few of them to you. Bill Mazeroski was a terrific fielder, pretty good defensive player. He batted .260 in his career, and he's in the Hall of Fame largely because he hit a home run to win the 1960 World Series, and that's a moment that everybody remembers. But is he a Hall of Famer? I don't know. It's marginal, And there are others like that who are honest.
Well, it took Pee Wee Reese and Phil Rizzuto a long time to get in.
It did.
It did, and it took Steinbrenner. Steinbrenner, turned the screws on Rizzuto, making sure that he did get in. But when you talk about the baseball writers in New York having too much influence, look at the case of a great Dodger that has never been in the Hall of Fame. They can't get the votes. Gil Hodges, he can't get the votes. So
he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he should be, exactly.
But one reason or another, he never got the vote.
How do you speak to this? Joe DiMaggio doesn't make it on his first year of eligibility. Whitey Ford, Yogi Berra, they don't make it on their first years of eligibility.
The writers were tough. The writers were demanding.
Do you think DiMaggio's strike was held against him years later?
You mean holding out for a salary?
Oh, strike. He held out. Really, when he was, I think it was a rookie or second year, really got the ire of the press. This before your time, of course, Hal.
It is. But I know the story that you're talking about. And in those days, players did not hold out. In fact, one of the books that I've done is called the Golden Age of Willard Mullins, baseball's Golden Age, Willard Mullins cartoons. And he did a cartoon, which is in the book, of during the Depression, of some poor guy on a park bench, clearly down and out, without a job, without any money, and he's looking at a newspaper and it says DiMaggio holds out. So you're right. That was a subject of great attention and great anger among the, maybe not among the baseball writers particularly, but among the public. And who is this guy holding out for more money when I can't get a job to pay, $25 a week, and I can't eat? I don't know where my next meal is coming from. It was a silly thing for him to do, a foolish thing for him to do. But, he did what he thought was right.
How did Williams get the ire of the press initially?
Who?
Ted Williams.
Oh,
in Boston.
I never. My only interchange with Ted Williams was a favorable one, a pleasant one, and so I have no issue with Ted Williams. But in Boston, the pool of writers in Boston were a tough group, and Williams was not a cuddly guy, not a warm and fuzzy guy. So there was some animosity between the writers and Williams, and as a result, one year that Williams was left off the most valuable player ballot in a year when he hit 400, the last 400 hitter. That's unconscionable. The writer who did that should be stripped of his ballot, because you're just using personal animosity against the guy, and you're not grading his performance on the field. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what the voters are supposed to be doing.
Well, I read somewhere that you talk about the writers and the greats that were left off the first ballot among the Yankees, some of the Yankees. And I read somewhere that there was almost like an unwritten rule among the baseball writers that no one should really be admitted on the first ballot, that there wasn't anyone that great that he should be given that honor. So someone knows, someone was always
there are writers today, even today, I believe, who will not vote for a guy on the first ballot, which is the reason that some of the greatest players in the history of our game we've never had a unanimous player to get into the Hall of Fame. Willie Mays. Was there ever a better player than Willie Mays? Was there ever a better pitcher than Tom Seaver? They came close, but they were not unanimous. And there are voters who will deliberately not vote for an obvious candidate because they do not want him to be a unanimous choice. Stupid, in my opinion.
I know it is. Yeah, absolutely. Except for weren't the original five ball players that went into the Hall of Fame in 36, weren't they unanimous? And wasn't that part of the reason that they said, well, nobody should ever,
I don't believe they were unanimous, David. I mean,
okay, I could be wrong.
I could be wrong, but I don't believe they were unanimous.
Even that would be hard to believe, considering the five that went in.
Well, not only that, but now today, the voting community is about 400 writers. That's a lot of people to all agree on a player.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I told the Hall of Fame when they took away the ballots of the older writers, including me, I never threw away my ballot. I know writers who did. I never gave my ballot to somebody else to fill out. I know writers who did. I never sent in a blank ballot. I know writers who did, because I respected the ballot and the process too much to do any of those things. But nevertheless, I don't have a ballot anymore.
Hey, Hal, just out of curiosity, since you were on the inside, and most of us listening, including myself or not, how did that ballot process work? Were you mailed the ballots? There was no.
Yes.
So
ballots come in the mail.
Yeah.
Around this time, usually the first week in December, last week in November, and you have about a month to study the ballot. They send you the names on one piece of paper. They send you the qualifications on another piece of paper. And you can look at, if you probably know a lot of what these guys have done, but it refreshes your memory about how many times they were on the All-Star team, how many times they were voted in the Cy Young or the MVP voting, that sort of thing. And you have a month to kind of ruminate about it. I always waited a couple of weeks before I filled out the ballot because I wanted to think about it. I considered it a sacred trust. I really believed that I was very honored to be a voter, and I believed it was important to do the right thing. You're allowed to vote for 10 players. Now, no year will there ever be 10 players going into the Hall of Fame. Usually you find 2, 3, maybe 4 who will get enough votes. You need 75% of the votes cast in order to get elected to the Hall of Fame. And that's it. You have until, usually I think it's January 1st or so, to get your ballot in, and then they announce the results within a week or so after that.
Did you think any of the writers sort of get together over drinks or something and discuss this among themselves, or do they I guess that's not illegal, so to speak, to talk about
not.
it.
It's part of hot stove league. It really is.
Yeah, exactly.
But you sit in the press room before games. You could sit in the press room in July before a game and say, hey, do you think so-and-so is a Hall of Famer? Do you think we should vote for him this year? He'll be on the ballot this year. So that sort of thing. Writers talk among themselves. We all do. We always do. And I don't know that colors your opinion, because writers are strong-willed individuals, and we all have our own opinions. And it's interesting. Some guys, it used to be you were on the ballot for 15 years. Now it's 10 years on the ballot. But there were players. Ralph Kiner got in his last year of eligibility.
Wow.
That means he did not get in 14 times, but he made it on the 15th ballot. Same thing for Jim Rice. Now, these were pretty good players, you know. I mean, I voted for both of them, but they had to wait.
But they were kind of on the bubble.
Sort of, yeah.
But that's what makes it interesting. You mentioned how that there's rarely a year when you'd be able to get 10 players on the ballot that were arguably deserving. Okay, let me just read some of the players on this year's ballot. I'll read them all.
This year's ballot is loaded, by the way.
It's absolutely loaded. Barry Bonds, an argument, of course, along with Clemens. I'm looking at the ones that I even think deserve mentioning. Vlad Guerrero, Trevor Hoffman, Chipper Jones, Jeff Kent. There's he has probably offensively broke a lot of Hornsby's offensive records at second base. An argument. Edgar Martinez, should a DH get in? Primarily a DH. Fred McGriff has incredible numbers, 500-plus home runs, never been thought about in terms of steroids, as far as I know. Kurt Schilling is a question mark. Gary Sheffield, Jim Thome. Here's my long shot, and a guy that I saw play in his last few years of being great in San Francisco, a shortstop, Omar Vizquel.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Terrific defensive shortstop. Very deserving. And that's probably 10 names right there. Mike Mussina, if I didn't mention. And the questionable Manny Ramirez, which Hal goes, he just put a red line through Manny. Mentally, as I said it, you were drawing the red line, weren't you, Hal?
In my mind, yes.
Okay.
I don't have the ballot to draw it on, but I could think about it.
Okay. Well, just that you do. David Hubler, those names that I read, anybody that stands out that you want to talk about, good, bad, or indifferent? Just anything to say about those guys?
Well, I certainly would vote for Omar Vizquel. I mean, what an incredible ball player with the Indians for so many years. And let's see. The Jeff Kent nomination. I think there's a guy from what I've read. I didn't know him out in San Francisco. I didn't know. But supposedly he gave a lot of sports writers a lot of grief, as far as I could tell. Plus,
yes, that's true.
He was a disruption amongst several of the teammates as well. That could be a factor negating his entrance into the Hall of Fame. When these stories filter out into the public about personalities and things like that, they've got to be true, and they've got to be pretty bad if they're negative, negative ratings or appreciation, because I think for the most part these clubhouses are pretty, keep to themselves. They don't want the public to know all the dirty laundry that comes out of them. So I think I tend to believe what I hear when I hear these stories about some of these ball players. So Kent would be one that I think. Now, Mussina's a good case. He had a great career with Baltimore. He had a terrific career with the Yankees. And there are a lot of people, a lot of Yankee fans I know, who really think Mike Mussina should definitely be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, he won 250 games. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of games.
What was the number? I didn't hear you.
270, I think.
Oh yeah, well, sure. Yeah, and he was, he was their number one pitcher on both clubs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good show, guys.
About the clubhouse, David.
Yeah.
There is a rule among players, among teams. What you say here, what you see here, what you hear here, let it stay here. Meaning, what's in the clubhouse should not get out of the clubhouse. Now, of course, there are writers standing around all the time, and that's a problem for them. They have to be careful with what they say, But a lot of the clubs have buttoned-down clubhouses pretty good,
And that's another thing that it's changed. Years ago, and if you talk to some of the old-timers, as I did doing my research, they took these long train rides out to St. Louis, and they all sat around the club car playing cards, the players and the sports writers. And I'm sure a lot of the dirt was uncovered during those trips that never got into the press.
Can the same be said, Hal, in your time covering? Were there things that were covered up, basically just a wink and a nod in your day?
It was changing when I came along, largely because of a guy here in New York named Dick Young. Dick Young was the first sports writer, first baseball writer, to go from the press box to the clubhouse. And they said, well, what are you going in there for? Well, he wanted to talk to the players. He wanted to hear their explanations of why they did what they did in particular situations. And Young was a trailblazer in that respect. And so it began to change. This would have been right after World War II. It began to change in that time. And writers started to go into the clubhouse to talk to the players. And that was largely because of television also. I remember vividly that we were told that the games are on TV, people are watching the games, they can see what's going on, but you got to get the player's perspective. And the only place to get the player's perspective was in the clubhouse. So we could go into the clubhouse where television couldn't go. Now, of course, television goes everywhere. I mean, they talk to the managers in the dugout during the game.
Yeah.
That used to drive poor Dick Young crazy because, I mean, you can't have access to players and managers during the game. The game is going on. But
well, they mic the coaches, first or third base coach.
That's another thing. You're right.
Yeah.
So times have changed in many ways.
As great a writer as Dick Young was, and I'm 71, so it puts my age into perspective. You guys are just a few years older than me. We couldn't wait for the news to hit the stands the night before to read Dick Young. It's great.
Clubhouse Confidential. The column was called Young Ideas, and it was called Clubhouse Confidential.
Well, yes, it was. And we got the skimmy. He apparently had Bavasi's ear, or Bavasi had his ear, or whatever it was. That he was the guy that told it like it was.
Oh yeah.
The end of his career comes along the Mets, and they're negotiating with Tom Seaver, who, what a lot of people don't know, he was under contract, and that was something that pissed a lot of people off, that he wanted to renegotiate a contract. And Dick Young took management's side, and I'm going to let Hal Bach tell the story of how Tom Seaver no longer was a New York Met in the prime of his career.
This happened in 1976. We had the advent of free agency. Catfish Hunter became the first high-priced free agent. He moved from the Oakland A's to the Yankees. And 77 came along, and Tom Seaver saw that big money contract, and he said, boy, I want some of that, And so he held out. He decided he was going to not hold out because he had a contract, but to demand a renegotiation of his contract. Now, Dick Young was a law and order guy, and the idea that Seaver was asking to essentially break baseball rules, change baseball rules, offended Young. And so he would write every day. I mean, it was unbelievable. He would attack Seaver, who was the franchise. He was the Mets franchise, to the point where they felt obliged to trade him. And one of the darkest moments in Mets club history, they traded Tom Seaver to the Cincinnati Reds for four guys who were nice fellows, but not quite the equal value that Tom Seaver. They got a second baseman named Doug Flynn. They got a pitcher named Pat Zachary. They got an outfielder named Dan Norman. And they got another outfielder named Steve Henderson. Now, if you've never heard of any of those players, you're forgiven because they were kind of obscure. And they were traded for the great Tom Seaver. And, of course, Seaver went on. He threw a no-hitter in Cincinnati. And he drifted around to the White Sox for a while. He ended his career with the Red Sox. He came back for a slight period of time with the Mets toward the end of his career, kind of a cameo.
And the irony is he was pitching for the Red Sox in '86.
In the World
year
Series.
The Mets won it and were in the World Series against them. He didn't pitch in the World Series.
But he was there.
But he was there. I don't know if he's still on the roster.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, I covered that World Series, but I don't think he was on the roster. He had some injury problems at the end of his career.
Right.
I think that was his last year. And then, of course, he became eligible for the Hall of Fame 5 years later and got the highest voting percentage in the history of the balloting, but not unanimous.
Not unanimous.
Right.
The guy
Don't forget Koufax and Drysdale held out together when they wanted to have a salary increase. What year was that? That was earlier. That would have been, 60? Yeah, early 60s. Yeah. That caused quite a stir.
They both wanted outrageous contracts. They both wanted $100,000.
Yes.
That was unheard of in those days.
Well, only DiMaggio got $100,000 in the,
That's correct.
Yeah.
But yes, that and we know where the juice was before, who had the power before free agency, and if the pendulum has swung, rightfully so in some ways, because if you go back to before free agency, the owners really had the players by the gonads. There was no.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But here's my question: should there be a salary cap in baseball? Because the sky's the limit. I mean, Giancarlo Stanton has got a contract that's worth about $28 million a year. That's a little sky.
Is there a salary cap on singers? Does Barbra Streisand?
That's their argument. That's the player's argument.
Yeah, and
that's the player's argument.
I happen to
Tom
agree
Hanks,
with him.
the great Tom Hanks, the actor, gets $20 million for a movie. So why not pay me $20 million to play 162 games, right?
Yeah,
right. If you think I deserve it, pay me.
That's the argument. That's absolutely the argument.
Now, that said, I've got to interject the union's incredible cheapness in not acknowledging some 500-plus players who played before 1980 and did not qualify at that time when it took 4 years to be pensioned. Now, since then, in 1982, Major League Baseball and the union got together and awarded Negro League and rightfully awarded Negro League players who did not have the opportunity to play in the majors. They awarded them pensions, slight pensions. Now, what they did, which was cool, but what they did, like I say, there were 500-plus players eligible, and many of whom contributed to baseball lore. I can give you some names off the top of my head. Dan Quayle. I think his name was Jim Quayle. He was an outfielder with the Cubs.
Jim Qualls.
Qualls, yeah. Okay, he broke up Tom Seaver's no-hitter.
Correct.
Example. Ted Theodore, the Stork, was
George Theodore.
iconic guy in New York. He did not have enough pension time to have a pension or to be eligible for a pension. And now these 500 players are getting together, and it took a book by Dan Gladstone. I don't know if you know of him, gentlemen, fellow author of yours. He wrote a book called A Bittersweet Cup of Coffee about guys coming up for short periods of time and their stories. And like I say, they're fighting for their rights, or what they consider to be their rights. And we're talking about a pension that has $2 billion. The Major League Union pension fund has $2 billion in the bank. Not only that, if a player comes up and he plays 43 games, not 4 years, 43 games, he's got a pension for life. If he gets into one game, he's got medical insurance for life. So things have changed. The union needs to go back and pick up some of their brethren, the people that really whose backs the union and the players are standing on today. And that's my little speech about that.
It's baseball's dirty little secret.
Yes. And I've had a number of players. A guy that comes to mind that I interviewed very recently was not because he was great or anything, just because his story was interesting. His name was George Cowell, or Larry Cowell, I'm sorry. And Larry was the last hitter before the DH. He was Ron Blumberg's roommate, who became the first DH, and the day before, he got the last at-bat as a pitcher. So, now, should he be in? Should he get a pension? Damn right. Money's there. These are players, not all of whom need it. Many of whom need it. I talked to a guy named Aaron Pointer, who's a brother of the Pointer sisters, and was an original Colt 45, Houston Colt 45, played with them for parts of 4 or 5 seasons after they became the Astros. Never played enough, never had enough pension time. He was up and down. He later went on to an NFL reffing career, and he's well taken care of. And I talked to him about that idea, and he says, I'm well taken care of, but it would be nice to have the money. It's principle, and there are many of my compadres that desperately need the money. You mentioned Gil Hodges. There was a fellow that was traded for Gil Hodges was
Bill Dennehy.
Bill Dennehy. He was on a rookie card, a rookie baseball card. How great memory, by the way. That's terrific.
Thank you.
He was on this rookie baseball card with Tom Seaver, if not Jerry Koosman, but point being that Bill Dennehy was traded for Gil Hodges when the Mets wanted to bring him back as the manager. And Bill Dennehy is one of those guys that's struggling. He's legally blind, and he's got a lot of bills and problems, and that pension, whatever they give, whatever small pension that they would give, would be a godsend to someone who's in his 70s and needs the money. So you worded it beautifully. Baseball's dirty secret, Hal.
And, when you talk about that, and you make a terrific point, Ralph, do you think guys like A-Rod and who else we've mentioned, some of the Stanton, the guys making $625 million for what, 5-6 years, do you think these guys really need a pension from Major League Baseball? Couldn't some of that money be diverted to these guys who really need it?
It doesn't have to come out of the players.
No, it doesn't. Of course not.
No, it wouldn't be diverted. It's not like they're taking. That's why. What
I'm saying is, my point is that do these guys most of that money is, they don't get a big lump sum of $625 million. It's all prorated by years, going way back to the time they're 85 or so, something like that. But, that's the irony of the situation, that these guys who are making millions a year will get a pension, and the guys who really need it are not getting the pension. I don't say take it away from them directly, but I'm just seeing there's a real dichotomy there.
Well, there's that other little thing where the unions are supposed to take care of their players. But it doesn't have to be financial that they're taking care of their players or not. If the union covers up a P-test and a guy continues to take steroids and not get caught, and not only does he fool baseball, but he's fooling himself, because the long-term effects of steroids have an excellent chance of lessening his lifespan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the union is saying, well, you know what? I'm advising you in your best interest. We're going to hide the P-test. In your best interest, we're going to show you how we're going to increase the amount of money you're going to make and the benefits. But isn't the union, wasn't the whole idea of a union to take care of a player's total well-being? And that's just a rhetorical question. But if the union is going to be successful enough to accumulate billions of dollars in funds and in bank, isn't there a responsibility? Shouldn't there be a learning process? Shouldn't somebody be passing on the information that you're not really taking care of your player? He makes 5, give him 6. Is that taking care of him? If he makes 5, give him a way to extend his life a little bit so he can live pain-free after retirement and all those things.
Hal, you would remember this because we're talking about. I guess it was in the late 50s or so that Major League Baseball went to 2 All-Star games a year, and if I remember correctly, the idea was that would raise more money for the players' pension fund.
Yes, that's true.
So, what is that money still going to the players' pension fund? Because the All-Star game today is a franchise. I mean, it's a whole week. It's like the Super Bowl wrapped up on a baseball diamond.
You have to remember there was no pension fund.
Right.
Those days.
So
whatever they could generate for a pension fund was gravy, and that's where that idea came from. But
they stopped so soon. You would think that it wouldn't have raised enough money to really.
Well, it was a bad idea. It was not a good idea.
No.
You can't interrupt the season twice to play an All-Star game. It's just not viable. Does the money from the All-Star game still go to the pension fund? I couldn't tell you. They don't share their books with me.
Anymore.
No, that's true. That's right.
That's becoming a trend these days.
Since they took away your ability to vote, they might as well stop you from looking in their books, right, Hal?
I guess so.
Okay.
This
is wonderful for me, gentlemen. Thank you for your company. And hopefully we'll do it again next week. Same time, same bat station.
Okay. Have a good week, a good Thanksgiving. Yep, you too.
Yes, but let's call it off. Well, no, this is Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, this is Thursday. Yep.
Beautiful. So we'll see you next Tuesday. It'll be great.
Okay. Right. Take care.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho. The show is Talkin' Vintage Sports from Nedick's at the Old Garden on 49th Street. Be good, everybody. Be safe.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.